So that phrase living paycheck to paycheck is something that's very common. And a lot of people will describe their finances that way. I think I saw a report that said that in a survey, like 76% of Americans considered themselves living paycheck to paycheck, which is a pretty huge number. There's obviously multiple reasons that contribute to that. But one thing that I do find interesting is that, even though we talk about living paycheck to paycheck, some people don't really fully understand what that means, or they don't even know if they fall within that category. Someone recently asked me to clarify what it meant. And for anyone who might not know, living paycheck to paycheck basically means that after you pay your essential expenses, you have nothing or very little left over. Now, of course, regardless of what the definition is, at the end of the day, only you can decide if you're living paycheck to paycheck. I want to take a moment to personally apologize for the number of times that I say paycheck to paycheck in this video. It is a bit excessive, but what's done is done, so we might as well have a little fun with it. But at the same time, I think it's kind of important to really understand the metric, because I do feel that there might be some people who say that they're living paycheck to paycheck and they really aren't. And with that being said, they might also use the excuse to justify why they're not saving or investing or paying off their credit cards. And with that being said, I want to run down a few scenarios that might indicate that you're not actually living paycheck to paycheck, even though you think you are. And of course, what you choose to do with this information is entirely up to you, but it is something to think about. So number one, you might not be living paycheck to paycheck if you don't have to constantly check your bank account. Now, this is not to say that you should not check your checking account on a regular basis, because you absolutely should. Anything can happen. Someone can get a hold of your bank account number, your debit card, go on a shopping spree. So you need to know what's going on with your account. But even though you should stay on top of things, if you don't technically have to check your checking account on a day-to-day basis, because you know that there's money in there, you know that you have extra cash for maybe miscellaneous things, and you're not worried about going into the red, there's a good chance that you have some wiggle room or a buffer in your budget, in which case you might not technically fall into that category of living paycheck to paycheck. Now, this doesn't mean that you're not. Like I said earlier, only you can make that determination. But if you have money in your account for bills and extra things and you don't have to monitor it closely, there's a good chance that you're not. The second sign that you might not be living paycheck to paycheck is if a small emergency will not cause you to panic. And notice I said small emergency. So if you have a home repair, a car repair, or if something else comes up and you're not worrying or panicking about how you're going to afford it because you have an emergency fund, that's also an indicator that you're not living paycheck to paycheck. Because having an emergency fund or a rainy day fund indicates that you're able to save on some type of consistent basis. And the sad reality is that when someone is truly living paycheck to paycheck, in most cases, there isn't anything or there's very little to save. And even if the person is prioritizing savings and they're putting away $5 a week and they're doing what they can, they might not have enough in their account yet to cover a smaller emergency. Another sign that you might not be living paycheck to paycheck is if you're able to eat out on a regular basis and you're not using a credit card, meaning that you are using cash that's in your bank account. And this might surprise a lot of people because food, it is a necessity. It's something that we do need to survive. So when some people think about needs and wants, there's often that mistake to put restaurants in that category as a need because you're eating. But typically when we talk about needs and wants, food that falls in the needs category includes food that you buy from the grocery store and you cook at home. On the other hand, eating out falls into the wants category because it's not a necessity. Now, for some people, eating out might be cheaper. It really depends on your circumstances. I've heard a few single people say that it's actually cheaper for them to eat out. And if that is the case, dining out could very well fall into a needs category for you. However, if you're dining out on top of buying food for the house, that is definitely a want. And the reason why you might not be living paycheck to paycheck if you're frequently eating out is because people who actually fall in this category don't typically have a lot of extra money for discretionary spending. Another sign that you're probably not living paycheck to paycheck is if you're able to go on vacations without getting into debt. Now, this does not mean that people who live paycheck to paycheck do not go on vacations or they don't go out of town or have getaways. But you do have to consider the frequency of your getaways. Because if you're someone who's able to go out of town quite often for leisure and you're using cold hard cash, that indicates an ability to set money aside for non-essentials. And the final reason why you might not be living paycheck to paycheck is that you're able to pay off your credit card bills in full every month. Now, I have to say, this scenario alone is not an indicator, because someone who's living paycheck to paycheck might choose to put all of their expenses on a credit card to get the rewards and then pay it off at the end of the month. However, if that is the case for you, one thing that can help you determine if you're really living paycheck to paycheck is to go through your credit card statement and look at every single charge throughout the month. So if you go through your statement and you see that every charge is for a necessity, be it rent, utilities, insurance, or food, or what have you, and you don't have anything for discretionary spending for that month, then yes, you might be living paycheck to paycheck. But on the other hand, if you go through your statement and you see charges for necessities as well as charges for other things, maybe dining out or shopping or going to the movies or maybe hobbies or what have you, and you're still able to pay off your credit card balance in full every single month, then there's a good chance that you're not living paycheck to paycheck. So those are a few metrics that help determine where you stand. And from time to time, it is important to do these types of self-evaluation, especially if you're not saving or investing or paying off debt. There are people who legit live paycheck to paycheck. They have an income problem and there's very little they can do. That's understandable. But if after some self-evaluation, you realize that you don't quite fit in that box, you really do owe it to yourself to make some adjustments so that you can get ahead.